I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by the incredible Don Brett, who is the host and founder of the CPG View podcast. Hopefully many of you know Don, but if you don't, he is a leading source of insights for omnichannel leaders in CPG and an established digital commerce strategist with prior leadership roles at Sycamore Partners, Newell Brands, and other major CPG firms. In our session, Disrupt or Be Disrupted, a very Don Brett title if you haven't encountered Don before, we're going to talk about how leading CPG brands are flipping the script on consumer engagement by using data and agility and personalization to connect, convert, and keep customers in ways that go far beyond traditional loyalty programs. From this, I think you're going to learn about what real-time engagement actually looks like in consumer products, how you truly can scale personalization across channels, even in an incredibly complex environment, and how some really quite remarkable major brands are deploying disruptive strategies to build loyalty without relying on our old friend, the discount. So, with all of that in mind, it's my pleasure to hand things over to Don and let him take it away.
Thanks for having us again. It means a ton. As you all know, we talk a lot about rising tides and what we can do as a community together. So greatly appreciate you having us on. I did have the opportunity to invite several friends of mine who are highly esteemed in their own right, and look forward to introducing them here in a moment. So we're going to talk about the challenges, the changes and challenges in consumer engagement strategies coming out of this panel. We're going to highlight key focus areas for each brand, not only in the current year, but future years. But before we get started, I would love it if the panel would mind introducing yourself and the company you're with. Ajay, why don't we start with you?
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Don, and thanks for having us. So Ajay Sharma, I head up all things e-commerce and omnichannel, including the Target business as well as emerging platforms for North America for Bayer Consumer Health. So think everything commercial, customer and consumer experience, and all things capabilities from a tools, tech, and data point of view. Prior to North America, I was in our global team in Switzerland. And prior to that, I was heading up e-commerce for Bayer in the UK. But the first half of my career was at Coca-Cola European Partners. Once again, excited for the discussion today.
Thanks, AJ. Brad, how about you?
Sure thing. And again, thanks for having me. Brad Santana, head of Omnichannel Sales and Marketing, the Hershey Company. I've been with the same company for 24 years, so I don't have the illustrious background that AJ outlined, but certainly touched everything digital here at the Hershey Company, as well as many roles across shopper marketing, sales, category management, you name it. So most channels. So thanks again for having me.
Can Sanay, how about you, my friend?
Yeah, hello everyone. This is Can Sanay. I'm Chief Business Officer, North America with SodaStream at Pepsico. I'm with Pepsico for the last, I would say, a little bit less than a year. Prior to that, I was leading the e-com team for North America Duracell business for a couple of years. And prior to that, I had a long experience with Procter & Gamble, starting in Turkey, then moving to Switzerland in different marketing and sales roles.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. And we're going to talk about how some of these leaders, their brand's definition of loyalty has changed in the last 2 years. We're also going to talk about some of the forces challenging the traditional CPG playbook that really has been at a tipping point as of late. So with that being said, the first kind of section here we're going to talk about is loyalty disruption and breaking old models. Some of us have been in the space for a while. Some of us haven't been in the space for that long. But just so everyone knows, the headline here is a lot of folks are running the same plays they've been running for years and years and years. Spoiler alert, things have changed. So we're going to talk about how we're breaking old models. So before we dive into the questions, technology is often the headline in our space. If you follow my nerdy content on LinkedIn, I talk a lot about this, about technology and AI and data. But honestly, the real transformation within CPG, you all probably know this, comes from breaking legacy habits, challenging entrenched ways of working from years and years of doing the same thing. And honestly fostering new paths forward. So I'm so lucky that I've got the team here to talk about this today. And we'll go ahead and start to dive into a couple of questions. So first and foremost, AJ, I want to kick it over to you. I want to get your thoughts here. What legacy habits or systems did you need to disrupt in order to move toward a more agile, omni-channel loyalty strategy?
We talk legacy systems and habits, but I think it started with legacy systems, habits, and organizational culture. And it was broader than just habits and systems for us. So about 18 months ago, we implemented a new organizational model called dynamic shared ownership. And the thought behind it was, how do we move away from traditional hierarchical organizations to agile-based teams where we form 90-day sort of sprints? I sort of start to fast forward 18 months now, and we actually operate across the organization with the team of teams. And what that has enabled us to do is actually break down silos. So if you go back to like legacy systems and hierarchies in the prior world, part of that was driven by silos and different KPIs. So you had different siloed organizations that were very much focused on my brands, my budget, my target, my KPIs. Here, we started taking much more of an enterprise view and then really getting clear on what the organizational priorities are, how we want to win with the consumer, and then how do we prioritize and move budgets and headcount and resources around to the biggest priorities. And just by definition, from an organizational point of view, that had an impact across multiple functions. So now I start talking about systems and sort of habits. Some of those included like data and fragmented data. If I go to prior world, data was sitting in multiple different functions. I talked about different organizational silos. You would have traditional sales having one set of sort of data, marketing using a different set of data, the media and supply teams using a different sort of set of data. So for us, it was about how do we consolidate that to have one source of truth. And for us, it wasn't just about having the sources of data, it was building the capabilities and the insights and the platforms to know what to do with it that helped ultimately guide our strategic and executional sort of choices. So as we get into the conversation, data and systems was one of the areas. The other was then tech stack modernization. So how do we have the right tools and technology and move away from pilots and individual areas of where we might pilot a tool or a system to like really creating roles to build it from the infrastructure sort of ground up that would help the country, but also sort of multiple markets. So there's a combination of things that range from sort of data, tech-based, organizational design, just to name a few.
That's a great point, AJ. We talk a lot about this on several episodes of the podcast. We've had several of you on. I think we need to get John and Brad on again here soon. But we talk a lot about data, dialogue, and speed, and really having the triangle that you can operate successfully in these large, multi-billion-dollar type of companies. It's not just good enough to have the data. You also have to have dialogue. You also have to have speed. And that's a bit of your points around ways of working and agility that you mentioned. So that makes total sense. John, I wanted to kick it over to you and the SodaStream team, and which is, part of PepsiCo. My mother-in-law has been a big fan of SodaStream for some time, so I'm familiar with it quite well. So I do know this. SodaStream is inherently disruptive. I knew that before you joined, and now since you're there, I've learned even more. How are you all using that brand DNA of disruption to challenge conventional CPG thinking with regards to consumer engagement and also retention?
Great question, Don. And you can pass my thanks to your mother-in-law to help us drive to household penetration. So as the DNA, as you said, SodaStream is a disruptor brand because we are trying to disrupt the ready-to-drink category, which is a super big and super convenient one for the consumers, right? So when we deep dive on our disruption factors, we are seeing majorly three things. Number one is SodaStream is really an eco-friendly alternative to ready-to-drink because with one SodaStream cylinder, you can save hundreds of plastic, the plastic packaging. So the second one is the value, like when you switch from bottles and cans to SodaStream, you are having like hundreds of dollars of saving per year on your wallet. And the third one that I want to tap a little bit on is the customization and control. Think about yourself going to a Starbucks. You all have a unique drink, right? Some people love the syrup, some people love the double or triple shots of espresso. Pretty much like SodaStream, what SodaStream does at your house for the beverage category. You can control your fizz, you can control how much syrup you put to your drink, and that customization and personalization benefit is really the disruptor factor, especially in the North America market. And how we are doing it is really like two things. Number one is the digital engagement, because really like SodaStream is one of the brands where like you don't know that you need it until you start using it. So that because of that, like somebody needs to tell you that story. And usually a 15-second TV copy doesn't give a justice to do that. So with that, like the more we engage with the consumers, thanks to user-generated contents, telling the story of the SodaStream, the more conversion that we are getting, and the more loyalty we are getting towards the consumers. And the final thing that I want to say is that the power of the innovation, right? So at the end of the day, like we are part of a big PepsiCo giant, and PepsiCo is an innovation machine. So like whichever innovation PepsiCo is launching, we are closely tracking and bringing those innovations on the flavors to our platforms. For example, like this year, we have launched 2 new flavor innovations, which have been really a huge hit. Number one was Pepsi Wild Cherry, which has been really like super popular. And the second thing was the mug root beer. So before we launched the root beer, I really didn't know that this is like such a thing. And now this is one of our like top selling flavors. And the power of innovation is also something that drives our loyalty and disruption in the category.
That's great. You all are at the forefront. They're quite lucky to have you leading the charge there. And I think it'll be quite interesting to see the disruption that you all continue to drive in the space. Maybe Brad, I wanted to switch to you and the Hershey Co. When people think of disruption in CPG, oftentimes technology gets the spotlight. It's kind of a shiny object. It's maybe the more sexy object. But from your experience, how much of the real transformation actually comes from breaking legacy habits and building bold, agile teams?
Whether it's technology, it's agile teams, or breaking legacy habits, it's absolutely critical to focus on the consumer. I think Ajay said that well a couple minutes ago. A clear focus on the consumer seems like it's pretty obvious, but I think often we lose sight of how the consumer evolves, or even on the flip side, if we look at how sometimes as companies we overreact to trends versus looking at real sticky behavior. Listen, things are changing really quickly. As an example, at our company and the evolution of Omnichannel over the past couple of years, we had to rethink how we approach retail, how we think about retail media, the importance of content, and really thinking about the organization, the structure, the strategy of how those things are supported and organized. I think what's unique for us at the Hershey Company are a couple things. Number one, we've really had to think differently about how we measure omnichannel. So today we're looking at things in terms of not just total retail, but digital versus brick and mortar. It's changing visibility and behaviors of how and where the growth is coming from and how we build out those strategies to support across the ecosystem. I think, what's also unique to my category is we have 99% household penetration in candy. We like to joke that it actually has slightly household penetration than toilet paper, which maybe scares some of you. I don't know, but it's an interesting stat. So we have a saying called "See candy, buy candy, eat candy." Well, when you have something with high household penetration and something that's the most impulsive in grocery, but you can't find it on a screen as easily, how do you sell it online? How do you sell impulse? So these are some of the new muscles that we're thinking about, not just regarding tech and capabilities and data, but also talent and how we're building out some of our more strategic plans. But first and foremost, it's grounded in that shopper path to purchase. It's grounded in the consumer. Those things need to rise to the top. And I also think it speaks to the importance of having very clearly aligned organizational goals, usually centered around things like sales, share, and profitability. But then what are those consumer signals and those KPIs that you're leveraging across the business to ensure that you're following that consumer and making those tweaks as you go?
Love that. Spot on. Now we want to dive into, there's 4 parts here. The second now is what real-time engagement really looks like in CPG. So we've got some of the best leaders in CPG on now. So it's a great time to ask them. We're going to explore how CPG brands, how these leaders, how the brands are evolving their approach to real-time engagement, even when they don't control the final transaction. So Ajay, I want to kick this first one over to you. So as you think about this, Bayer operates in a highly complex, regulated environment. How are you all thinking about ways to overcome the lack of direct consumer access to still create personalized real-time engagement at scale?
If you think about the first part, which was about building the infrastructure, this is now moving on to how do we build those partnerships to help us with those strategic and executional choices. So firstly, it's a partner-first data strategy. So we formalize data partnerships with key retailers to access usable data outputs while obviously respecting data sharing constraints, for example, like using clean rooms. API and retailer integration. So how do we leverage those retailer APIs into now the tools and the infrastructure that we've built for the organization that actually help with those real-time decision makings? Think AMC as a good example as one of those sources. The other part is around contextual sort of connection as well. So where we do have clinical claims, we're in a position to start using other signals. Ratings and reviews could be a good example. So how do we take those other signals and then incorporate it alongside, in terms of our sort of activation? But again, the difference from about 2 years ago versus now, we can get that insight and make those changes within 24 hours when it comes to content and get it uploaded. Good example would be a brand like Alka-Seltzer Hangover, where we have seasonal content, for example, where we can change the content, be it for St. Paddy's Day versus the holiday season versus the Super Bowl. And then, we're in a much better way of responding to what that consumer needs. And again, where you'll hear starting with the consumer first, as Brad sort of mentioned, it's easier said than done, because how do you balance what the consumer really needs versus your internal sort of P&L as well? And the other part is, measurement with a focus on incrementality as well. So we use advanced modeling and content to help us drive what is truly incremental, what is channel shift, and what are the campaigns that will help us reach new households. So for an organization that plays in multiple categories, we have nutritionals and vitamins with brands like One A Day. We have digestive health with brands like Miralax. We have the pain category with brands like Aleve. We've got multiple categories with multiple sort of consumers. How do you really start to understand first-time sufferer versus recurring sufferer? We have allergy with Claritin, for example, which is one of our biggest brands. Each one shops and engages in a very, very different way. So again, if you go back to a few years ago where you might try something and apply it to all brands, we've got to a point now where we are a lot more specific around what we do. And again, earlier on, I mentioned, let's not underestimate, the power of KPIs as well. You get what you measure. And, once you understand the business problems to solve with the consumer at the heart of it, how do we really tailor what those metrics are to make sure we're getting what we need that lead to the right activation plans? So if we are targeting household penetration, for example, that would lead to a different sort of set of metrics, which may not always be sales in the short term, which is okay. And then ROI modeling as well. Like, let's change our expectations of ROI, knowing that the lifetime value definition has also changed as well. So again, we'll start to unpick those throughout the conversation, but that's how we're sort of thinking about it.
Love that. Well, I want to kick it over to John on your side. SodaStream has a strong D2C element, probably more pronounced than most for sure. But you're still a part of a global CPG giant that you mentioned before. How are you balancing the speed and personalization of a disruptive brand with the scale and obviously some implied complexity of a legacy, large multi-billion-dollar enterprise?
Yeah, it's a great question, Don. And, it's a good play in between leveraging like a startup mentality when it comes to SodaStream, but within the Pepsico, leveraging the Pepsico's resources as the big giant. We are playing with both. So like number one thing that I want to say is SodaStream is one of the biggest brands in terms of the D2C presence, as you mentioned. And one of the key things that we always do with the other brands in PepsiCo is to share and reapply, a lot of executions. Also becoming like a talent hub for different brands. Just to give you an example, our new head of ecom for SodaStream North America was previously managing the Gatorade B2C business and also the social commerce part of the things. So we are also doing a lot of talent exchange with the Pepsico, which is really like helping us to build the capabilities and drive the loyalty, because D2C is all about the frictionless CO2 exchange and the subscription models that are working really well. And with the PepsiCo's power in terms of data capabilities, agency hubs that we are leveraging, we are also using a lot of legacy SodaStream systems to keep the D2C business growing year over year.
Brad, I want to switch it over to you. So the Hershey Co. in CPG, brands often don't control the final transaction. How do you define real-time engagement in that context? What does it look like in practice?
Yeah, so when it comes to brands and our brands, I believe there is an important distinction between owning the transaction and owning the relationship. And I was thinking about that a lot, here recently. So love the question. I mean, meeting consumers at their moment of need, regardless of where that transaction takes place, helps enables brands, to make strong connections with consumers. I think we're going through that evolution, specifically at the Hershey Company, as we maybe don't think about whether they started here on Meta or TikTok, or where they ended here at Amazon or Walmart, and maybe how those places more directly interact with one another. In fact, we've done some really unique testing. I won't name the partner or the situation, but we recently partnered to track consumer engagement across some of the upper funnel media tactics that and strategies we've been doing, and be able to follow them all the way down the path of purchase to get a true understanding of interaction and ROI, which has been super impactful as we look at the broader media ecosystem. But I think specifically, as you're working across with your partners, whether that be retail media networks, retailers, agencies, you really have to make sure that the shopper and consumer journeys are clear, and that the consumer jobs to be done are really clear as well when you're focusing on delivering real-time engagement and solutions. So many of us have multiple brands in the same categories. Many of us have brands that fall within other categories that are sometimes complementary or not. So I think, again, in that theme of following the consumer, understanding the jobs to be done, and then figuring out the route to market, whether those are different media channels, retailer channels, working cross-functionally across the organization, focusing on those right goals and KPIs allow you to put together the right strategy.
Spot on, Brad. And so many of those points, this is going to be interesting as we continue to go through. So we're going to switch gears now. We're going to go to our third point. So we're going to talk about scaling personalization in the reality of complex CPGs that many of us know and live and breathe daily. So here we're going to talk about execution at scale, and would love the panelists, your perspectives on how you're making personalization work across. There's what complexity looks like on paper, and oftentimes it's not that complex. And then there's the reality of the real world complexity. So we'd love to dive in here a bit. Brad, I'm actually going to circle back to you. What challenges are you all facing when trying to deliver personalization across such diverse retailers, channels, and consumer segments? Would love a little bit of flavor from you.
Number one, there's just a lot of different people, whether that's internal customers, channels, agencies, all have part of this process. So I think reiterating some of the things that I've talked about before, like really clear strategy, even defining the problem statement, focus on the consumer. Those things are really really important first and foremost. But the challenge is you're trying to deliver meaningful consumer connection to each individual person or audiences or group of people, consumers. But you have to figure out a way to do it efficiently at scale. So not only do certain brands meet specific consumer occasions, but also specific channels and retailers. They all have consumers have different trip missions. So you're trying to organize this all in a way to figure out specific strategies across the board, and deep understanding of that consumer segment that you have, or the consumer segments, the occasions and the jobs to be done that your brands can deliver, allow you to cluster and pull together the right level of content and the right messaging that you have, making sure that you have connections at the right moment, and giving that personalized feel, but doing it, efficiently through technology. And I think moving forward with technology, it'll be easier than ever to do things more at speed. The questions we should really be asking ourselves as brand ambassadors are more of the why questions, right? In terms of ensuring we're staying on brand, that we're meeting the consumer need, we're preventing that mixed messaging. In today's environment now, where it's very easy to get out quickly, potentially jeopardizing things like brand safety, or even overwhelming consumers with frequency, as you face many of these challenges in the market, because there's infinite ways to go about it. But I think once you're able to kind of center that focus around the consumer, again, jobs to be done, and then figuring out the trip missions and frame that up the right way, you can really figure out how you're going to partner both internally and externally to make that happen.
Love that. So AJ, going to switch to you. For Bayer, personalization at scale has to work with stricter regulatory and product parameters than maybe Brad's Hershey bars or for John's beverages. How have you built a system where personalized touch points still reinforce trust and ultimately loyalty of that product?
I think if you look at pace of change in our ability to sort of keep up, one of the areas is compliance by design. So every personalization rule runs through a compliance layer, legal, medical, and regulatory team that enforces that. So that would include approved language, mandatory disclaimers, channel restrictions before a message can be sent. So again, if you think about the old world, where it would be sort of manual, this allows us to do that a lot quicker to make sure those personalized connections and messages are getting out quicker as well. And again, even from a content library, I talked about, personalized sort of content from a seasonal point of view, for example, across multiple brands. We've now got like pre-approved content libraries that we're not creating things from scratch, but we're adapting. And again, that is based on that consumer insight that we get as well. So, digital brand managers can personalize by using a vetted library of copy, imagery, and clinical references. So this, preserves the speed and the compliance and allows for much faster response times in terms of insight to action to execution, and then putting that back into the machine to actually learn as well. And then measurement framed around trust signals. So, we track key signals like ratings and reviews, repeat purchase behavior, etc., to understand if the personalization is actually adding value as well. So again, one theme that you'll probably hear across these, even though we're talking about loyalty, we're not looking at loyalty in isolation, but it's part of a connected, broader sort of plan that allows us to connect and follow up sort of consumers.
I love that. AJ, what were the three things?
There was an insight point of view, there was an action, there was a learning point of view, and then putting it back into the machine of reapplying. And I think, understanding what doesn't work is just as important as understanding what does work as well. And then the other part, or the last thing I'd probably add, you talk about, what does this mean in a big corporate at scale as well? The examples I'm giving or perspective is sort of North America. We're a global organization. And again, we have, different regulatory rules and laws in different markets. So that adds another layer. So, one product in one country might be have a totally different medical regulatory implication in another country as well. So for us, it's understanding what we can centralize, but also what we do need to keep separate with markets and regions as well.
Love it, AJ. Virginia in the chat, she saved us, AJ. Insight to action to execution.
There you go.
You heard it from Virginia after, AJ. Okay, awesome. John, I want to switch to you. You're balancing global oversight with localized execution quite well. You talked about it, even root beer at the beginning as a new flavor. How are you using systems or data frameworks to enable personalization and loyalty without over-engineering it?
It's a strong claim, Don. So it's like sometimes we need to over-engineer it because when you look at the nature of the product on the global lens, consumer barriers and drivers can be different from one country to another country. So, for example, like when you go to Germany, SodaStream is all about no schlepping, because like smaller apartments, they don't want to carry the bottles and the cans. They don't have enough like country space to load them, etc. You go to Canada, it's all about sustainability because Canada is a market which is like very big in terms of the plastic pollution. You come to US, as to my Starbucks example, it's more about the personalization and the customization of the drinks. So with that, unfortunately, we don't have one global silver bullet that can work everywhere. So that's why we are doing a lot of localized executions. And once you know about your particular consumer driver and or barrier, then it becomes things become easier. Everything starts with the consumer, right? So if you are more looking for a customized drinks or value, you can get really a laser targeted message from SodaStream based on your need. Okay, so with that, we are using a lot of tools from Meta, Amazon, TikTok to just leveraging their laser targeting capabilities in a way that we provide the right message to the right consumer for them to switch to SodaStream proposition.
Yeah, that's a great point. The right message at the right time to the right consumer in a contextually relevant manner. I've heard that there's a company pretty good at it, Emarsys. They might be able to help. No, you're spot on, Jean. Brad, I wanted to ask you quickly before we move to section 4. What's the one internal friction point, whether it's tech, process, or people, or other, that you've had to solve or work to try to address before personalization at scale could truly happen?
I think it's a mixture of a lot of things. If I were to say one thing, it's tech. But as you know, when you're trying to implement tech, it requires different processes. It requires a lot of different things to make that happen. I think as an example, if you wanted to test the effectiveness of 1 million different types of creative, and you'd say, why would you do 1 million? Well, maybe because you've identified a lot of different types of jobs to be done, segments, brands, where you could test a bunch of things simultaneously and quickly to get a read of what was the most effective to move forward with. You'd have to have the technology to produce it efficiently at scale, but you'd also have to have a strong process on how to do it well, right? That requires buy-in of folks that maybe traditionally would have done it through an agency versus some type of AI. It would require thinking about how you deploy that at scale. There's a lot of different elements to that. I think if your brand target's clear, you can templatize a lot of that through the creative process and leverage technology to generate this content at scale and do it both efficiently and effectively. Again, this requires our creative teams, our content teams to be thinking about AI resources to produce content in new and different ways. So it is a little bit of both the tech and the process and the culture. I would say another great example is media. So if you think about media today, you have different audience targets across multiple different media ecosystems. Our media's team and their ability to leverage things like clean rooms and different agency partners to develop the right audience targets, which is really important for our business. If you think about all the brands we have, the seasonality of it requires that really good balance between, technology, which allows you to move quickly and at scale, but also redefining some of the processes. And although I wouldn't say that this is maybe personalization in the same way that we would all traditionally think about it, even if I think about it downstream from a sales perspective, today we have things like planograms that are out there, right, in market. And a lot of times planograms are set with the data of what has been purchased or sold. But if we start thinking about leveraging things like, technology and looking at, keywords or other, trends that we're seeing, how are we using that from a shelf back perspective to maybe think about, new spaces in a planogram, brands or items that are trending that should be saved because of incrementality or driven because of incrementality. So I think there's a lot of different ways to leverage digital shelf tools, AI, et cetera, to help drive toward those more personalized experiences. But you need a very clear process to make sure that those things come all the way through your organization.
Love it. Okay, so we're going to switch last to disruptive CPG strategies to build loyalty without discounts. Okay, so Ajay, I want to come to you first. In a highly trusted category like health and wellness, loyalty can't be built with discounts. How is Bayer redefining loyalty through value, education, experience? Would love some thoughts.
Yeah, so let me give perspective of, we talked about what the broad strategy is and what the broad goals are. we actually zoomed out before we sort of zoomed back in again. So, we focused on, what are the 4 or 5 big areas that will have the biggest transformative impact as an organization. And we actually split these into like transformational and then sort of operational. And one of those key factors is around sort of portfolio and innovation. So how do we create a fit for purpose omnichannel portfolio that is rooted in with what the consumer wants, as opposed to, I don't know, building innovation that meets internal P&L sort of guidelines. And in order to do that, we had to change the way we think about process, skills, and we look at portfolio or innovation in a few ways. The first one is just making better decisions with the portfolio that we have across category and platform. Secondly, is around truly differentiated innovation pipeline. So this goes beyond bundling. This is unique forms designed for that consumer. The third one is then about how do we leverage international brands that help us get into category spaces. And then the fourth one is new acquisition. So there is no silver bullet, and innovation and portfolio for us is a combination of all those 4 areas. So outside of discount, offering and creating something, a value proposition that the consumer wants was, one of the key sort of pillars. And again, you fast forward 18 months, we've got like 9 to 10 unique SKUs that were launched online only over the last 18 months. So, innovation is one form of it. Then we come onto like replenishment and convenience. Once we've got the consumer into the brand, how do we make it easy for them to repurchase and in a way to sort of drive loyalty as well? So subscription, auto replenishment programs to reduce friction, to drive repeat purchases. And then the big one is science at the digital shelf as well. You sort of mentioned, one of our key strengths is how do we bring that science and education? And this is about, moving away from individual products and brands, but it's like, how can we be the champions of healthcare, and how can we provide the right education to allow our consumers and patients to make the right informed choices, regardless of where they choose to purchase. And what that enables us to do is obviously track, collect information where possible, all within sort of guidelines, use that insight and then feed it into the machine that allow us to do some of those things more effectively. So those are some of the things outside of call it discount that we're actively working on. And then obviously the last one is about community. So how do we keep that conversation going using social platforms, for example, and we're building that real healthcare community.
Ajay, thank you so much for that. And we've got 5 minutes and 2 more questions. I did just want to state the obvious. Everyone knows this is highly complex. These large CPG brands, there's a lot of nuances, and it's important to pick a partner that has the proper capabilities to enable this at scale. So obviously, if you're listening to this, then you've considered Emarsys, and I think it's certainly something you should look at. It really vet and make sure the solution provider has the right capabilities to do this at scale. When you get into these large multi-billion-dollar enterprises, they really have to have what it takes. So I would highly advise looking under the hood pretty deeply and make sure your RFPs are solid and sound. So anyhow, last 2 questions here. John, we'll go to you, and then Brad. Last 4 minutes, maybe 2 minutes each. So John, SodaStream has a sustainably driven proposition rather. How are you turning that into a loyalty asset rather than relying on price promos?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you don't know like how the proposition works, I have like this like CO2 cylinder, which is like equivalent of 126 plastic bottles. Okay, so that's why sustainability is really important in terms of the plastic pollution. And when you look at like how you drive the loyalty through that, is making the exchange of the cylinders frictionless. Okay, so that's why we have 2 focus. Number one is making our digital, especially like the D2C platform, in a way that like the exchange of the cylinder is really like very easy to put in the box, send it back, subscription services, similar to what Ajay has mentioned. And the second part of it is making the product available in stores. So currently there are like tens of thousands of CO2 exchange points in US only. When you go to stores like Target, Kohl's, Best Buy, Ace Hardware, like you name it, You can staples, you can exchange your cylinders in just like 30 seconds. So when you make your process that easy and that powerful, then this is becoming a fundamental driver of keeping the consumers loyal to your brand.
Hey, how many bottles did you say that saved? That cylinder you had?
It's like 100 and more than 120 bottles with one cylinder. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Brad, we're gonna shift to you here. Last question, Brad, and I know you could take us home. So, what disruptive strategies are you seeing being used today to build loyalty without leaning solely on price cuts?
I think outside of things like retail media and contextual targeting, you're seeing movement in tactics, fostering consumer loyalty with things like personalized recognition, whether that's, birthdays or community engagement around user-generated content. And you're also seeing brands figure out those surprise and delight moments with things like samples and exclusives. The thing that I'm most excited about as it relates to the Hershey Company is in 2026, we will be releasing the movie, or part in the movie Hershey, which is a story about Milton Hershey and his life and legacy. And if you didn't know, the mission of the company is to support the Milton Hershey School, which provides education for a number of disadvantaged or challenged children that come from all over the country and reside here in the local Hershey area. So to think about being able to tell the story about Milton Hershey and the legacy and the brands, and how that mission of the company supports the life of making moments of happiness and greatness for others come to life in a big way, is a story that maybe we haven't told in the history of the company, but hopefully will drive some additional consumer loyalty without the need of things like promotion, because of the emotional connection people will have with the brands and the legacy of the company.
Awesome. Thank you to the panel for joining me. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. And Sarah and team, thank you for having us join. We greatly appreciate it.
Just to kind of wrap things up a little bit, I hope everybody heard that, particularly in that last section, loud and clear, that loyalty is more than discounts. Hallelujah, right? Loyalty is more than discounts. I don't think any of us are suggesting that discounts don't play a role in gaining attention. I think we all know that. But if you listen to what we just heard from Hershey about how the next gen of CPG loyalty is really being built on value and trust and brand experience, and thinking far beyond some of the more traditional things that we talk about, consumer education, service, community, and access, to really present ourselves as a truly holistic brand, and to be a holistic brand, not just present ourselves in that way. I also heard loud and clear that real-time engagement really is possible, even if you don't have direct sales. And if you're combining data and signals and agility, we as marketers can deliver timely and relevant interactions that do strengthen retention, even if that person isn't right in front of us. And I think although we have some incredible legacy amongst the brands that we had here, agility was the message that was coming across, and that agile teams are the ones that are going to adapt fastest to consumer signals. And many of these brands have incredibly complex portfolios, but by doing that, they are going to engender and keep long-term loyalty. So those are some of my takeaways for today. I'm sure many of you had many more. Thank you so much to our distinguished panel. Thank you to Dawn. We really appreciate your time and your insights. If anybody wants to connect with Dawn or our fabulous panel, you can see QR codes online, take you to LinkedIn profiles, and allow you to connect directly and continue the conversation once the masterclass is over. So thank you again to Dawn and our speakers. I'll let you go for the rest of your days, and we look forward to seeing you soon.